Hi there. Welcome to 6 Minutes of Witchcraft with me, Laura Tempest Zakroff. And I'm also joined by Gracie today, right there behind me. And today's topic is one that folks have been asking me about for at least 2 months now, and that is the subject of grief. Now, obviously, grief is a huge, complex topic that can't go into a huge amount of depth in 6 minutes or a little longer than that even. But there are some things I'm hoping that you can all take away from that will be helpful techniques and perhaps a little better state of awareness about not only dealing with it for yourself, but recognizing it in other people around you. Now, with grief, we tend to automatically assume that grief is a result of loss in terms of physical beings, right? That a loved one, a family member, a beloved pet has passed on. And especially during the pandemic right now, it feels like that is even heightened, even if it's not a loss directly from the virus. It feels like every loss that we suffer is just one more grain of salt in a wound, right? Because, why is that? It is that we're not only just suffering this physical loss of life, right, in our lives, but we're also facing a mental, emotional, and spiritual type of loss. We're all dealing with the fact that whatever we had planned for 2020, whether where you saw your work or your finances or trips, events you had planned, there is a dramatic loss of being able to obtain those expectations, to fulfill those plans. And those two represent a state of grief. Even if you're just like, oh, I don't, it seems silly because it hadn't even, wasn't even a physical thing, but it is. So that has an impact. And if we keep that in mind, that we're all in a state of grief together, we can perhaps have a little bit more compassion for what's going on, what we're seeing in the world. Because you think about the 5 stages of grief, we have denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. And especially anger and bargaining and denial, right? You just look around the internet, you see what's showing up in the news, and you can tell that like, why are these people doing some of the most insane things, like, and believing and saying these things? Because they're in a stage of grief. It doesn't necessarily make it right, but it does give you a meeting ground to find that from. So I think that's really important to recognize that. And this ties into that immense feeling of exhaustion, of that lack of energy, right? Because there's so much stress and anxiety on our systems that we're slowly trying to process through all of those expectations, all those hopes, those dreams that are now delayed or not going to happen, or have to happen in some other way than we had planned. And that is traumatic. It is traumatic. There's small children going by. Those are not traumatic. But focusing back in. All right, so things that you can do. Now, I know so many people want, like, give me a spell, give me a sigil, tell me what rock to use. Like, I wish it was that easy to just be like, yes, of course, take a hunk of amethyst and rub it all over your head, and take 3 aspirin and don't call me. That's it doesn't really work that way. Grief is a process, and so it's not something that's over and done with. We have to go through it. We have to journey through it. So what I'm going to recommend for you is not a list of crystals or herbs or a particular spell to do, but different things that you can be physically doing a little each day to add, to process, to get through it. So earlier today, I released a ritual workout that focuses on the cauldron of motion, and that is dealing with heart-centered energies, what keeps us moving through life. And this is where often, we say heart heartbreak, right? That loss, that feeling right here. When you have dealt with death, right? You feel it here. And doing physical exercise and movements and working through your body is a very healthy way to deal with the stress of grief, to get things flowing. Because what we tend to want to do is just kind of curl up into that little ball and not look at the world, which is one way of dealing with it. And I think we should all have like nesting time, that you just kind of curl up, ideally with a cat or a dog or a friend if you can, and just, have that time. But you can't sustain that. It's not healthy to just not move. You need to keep moving. So some sort of dance, some sort of working with music can be really, really helpful. Another thing, so if you are dealing with the loss of a physical being in your life, one way that you can acknowledge that is to create an altar. It can be an ancestral altar if it's somebody, coming from your family, but it can just simply be an altar for the dead. And I wouldn't recommend necessarily making it you're on your main altar, though that can be where you initiate the working. But having a special place, perhaps in the kitchen or living room, hearth area if you can, or a special place outside that you can go to connect, to talk with that person or that being. And being able to have that communication is healing, to still be able to have that presence, especially, during this pandemic where you can't, have a proper funeral, a big gathering of people, and to do what we normally do to deal with death. So kind of having that own memorial space for yourself or your household to deal with can be really helpful. You can do a spell to say, okay, I'm asking to heal this part of myself, to bring this energy in. Sure, you can do compassion and kindness and cleansing and healing, and work with herbs and stones if you want, right? You can bring those elements in, what feels good to you. Holding onto a stuffed animal totally works. Even say even more powerful than holding a hunk of stone. Right? Something soft and cuddly. I have this lovely oil from Spiral Moon Herb Craft here that is for grief healing. It's a really lovely mix. It has frankincense, clove, cypress, oak moss, and jasmine, and rose petals and yarrow and a few other little things in here. And it smells wonderful. And I put on an essential oil or perfume every day. It's just an everyday thing. It's not just a grief thing. But having this, especially if I'm dealing with some sort of loss, and especially rose, there's something about rose that I find is powerful and comforting at the same time. And frankincense is known to help with depression as well. So having that smell and checking in with it, and thinking about who you've lost at the same time. I mean, you can do that with a favorite perfume or cologne of somebody who has passed over, right? So that is an olfactory experience, right? And so you can consider that. And other physical activities, like, if you're like, I don't know about dance, like just getting out and walking and being in nature, going around the block, seeing what's happening in your neighborhood, can be really, really helpful. Picking up something where, is an activity like cooking, is an activity like cleaning, just what gets you moving and processing, especially cleaning. I feel like cleaning is my solution for most things that don't feel great. Is if I clean the bathroom sink, suddenly life feels a little brighter. I don't know. That's coming from down my matriarchal lines of like how generations of women and all sides of my family have been like, how do we deal with grief? Clean that shit. So that could be a thing too. So think about that. And most importantly, be kind to yourself, to have a little bit of patience. Because you're going to forget things. And this is the thing about stress, depression, grief, anxiety, all these things, is we forget things, we make mistakes, and they seem amplified. Like everything, like the same thing that you would do if it had been normal times, and you'd like, oh, no big deal. But because of the level of stress, right? That depth of grief that we're dealing with, it just feels, again, more acute, that everything is just a little bit more sharper, and so we're harder on ourselves. So I had to dig from a well of patience. And that might be another great idea too, is to have a physical cauldron that you are putting and collecting things in that are important to you. So I hope this helps. I know, so many of us are dealing with that loss of physical life, but also of what we had hoped to have happen. And it's natural to go through all of those stages and to feel angry and to try to work around things. But the more that we can still be aware of that we're going through it and that other people are going through it, I think that can be really helpful. That acknowledgement, that conscious acknowledgement, means that we're more prepared to accept and to build, to move into the next stage. So I hope that helps you out, gives you some things to think about. See what else. If you have any other suggestions, be sure to leave them in the comments. I'm sure other folks would like to read that. Be sure to subscribe, and remember, every day I am doing the ritual workout. So come and join me for that and get some physical movement on. I guarantee it will help with the mind, the body, and the spirit. Thanks so much.